think I'm really a cultural tourist, and it blew my mind.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Big Local Podcast because we are Black, global, and we are local. And today we're continuing with the conversation of Africans working in other African countries. In the previous episode, we talked about Agenda 2063, the Africa that we want. And in that agenda, there's a lot to do with migration, labor, and movement. So I figured we need to have more conversations with more Africans. And today I have another lovely lady on the show. I'll let her introduce herself and then we'll kick off this conversation. She tells us her story of how she ended up working where she is right now, where she's living and where she's working. Diana, over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Marungi. How are you? Thank you for having me on the show today. It's a pleasure being here, and I think you're doing amazing work with the YouTube channel.
Thank you so much, Diana. So, Diana, you need to tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? What you enjoyed as a child? Did you ever have dreams of ever leaving your home country to go work elsewhere? Things like that.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite interesting whenever you're asked to introduce yourself and say a bit more about yourself. First, recourse is, this is what I do professionally. So I really like how you structure those questions. So, a Kenyan by birth. I was born and raised in Nairobi, and went to school in Nairobi. Did my university in Nairobi. Worked for my early years in Nairobi, within the communication and knowledge industry. So I have a very strong background in it. Growing up, we grew up in a relatively small family. I'd say small, quote unquote, because the definition of the size of family is changing in Africa right now. So I had two brothers and one sister who I am extremely, extremely, extremely close to. Grew up with my mom, my dad, both working professionals. But the one thing I remember about our childhood is the fact that I really loved to read. I loved books. I loved magazines. Oh my goodness, I loved the Reader's Digest. I loved the Reader's Digest. And I remember when we'd go up country to visit my grandma, I think my aunts, they used to collect magazines and, store them up country. And whenever they'd go visit, and I had this massive collection of Reader's Digest, however dated, to read. And they had interesting stories and sections where you'd learn about vocabulary and things like that. And I think that's really where my love for words and books started. So I think I am privileged because my parents saw this interest right from the start, and they'd really buy us books and magazines and encourage our reading and writing. And I love the language, not the language by itself, but as a mode of expression. So I remember when I left primary school. In English, I actually had a 99%, which was the perfect score in the language. So when I joined university, I think I was looking for this, creative outlet, for my creativity, an outlet for my creativity. And so I enrolled for the visual arts class that we had in the 844 system. And one time we went for a holiday, and we came back from our holiday, and our art teacher had just left the country, and we didn't have a teacher for nearly an entire term.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd sit in the art room and entertain ourselves and try and make do with our time. But I think in that at that time, I think that the school was trying to liaise with the ministry and the
Uh-huh.
authorities to try and get a replacement, and they just could not.
I
And
know.
so all the art students were then bundled up and added to the students who are doing home science, you know. So that was it in as far as my creative expression was concerned in high school.
Wow.
Went to pre-university in Nairobi as well. Um, we had an arts program there as well in St. Mary's School, and I enrolled for it almost immediately, and I loved it. But it was clear, and I think this was a truth I didn't want to reckon with early on. To be an artist, you have to have some base, technical skills,
Yes.
whether it's drawing the human form or creatively expressing yourself in a certain way. And if I'm quite honest with myself, I don't really think my visual art really measured up to the other students who were brilliant artists who, I was
Mm-hmm.
in class with, and that each honed a very unique style for their art. So I, you know, I was almost like lost trying to figure out where can I, express myself creatively. And at
Mm.
that point I stumbled writing.
Oh.
So I did a lot of writing in my free time, both, creatively for myself, but also on, short-term, small-time assignments. And that's really what I define as one of my passions in life. It's just about
Mm.
creating a strong narrative through words, and more recently supplementing that with data and number and figures. So yeah, that was my schooling. University as well. I studied communication in Daystar University in Nairobi. Um, Public relations specialization.
Mm.
And I worked and lived in Nairobi for very many years after that. So I did have a bit of experience. I think I was really blessed to have worked with an organization or organizations that had, either regional or pan-African remits, at some points, communication agencies. And that
Mm.
gave me a bit of, insights of, the differences in, culture and, ways of working in expression across the African continent. I hadn't deliberately set out to work outside of Kenya, but as life would have it, life sometimes just throws you that curveball when you're getting a bit too comfortable. And I was working. I'd shifted from private sector communication. I was now within the development space,
Mm.
and I met my current husband, um, who
Mm-hmm.
happened to be Uganda.
Uh-huh.
And so, yes, so we had a courtship period of about 2 years. And all that time, I think the reality was dawning on me quite slowly that, eventually we'd have to make a call on where we're going to live if we do get
Yes.
married. Um, but, we tend to be creatures of comfort. Change sometimes is the hardest thing to, deal
Yes,
with,
it is.
especially if it's, quite abstract. Like, I don't know, I know this place, but I don't really know this place. And my life has been here the whole time. How do I even see myself moving? Um, and I think the other thing that really complicated it for me is I've always been quite independent. I've worked, right through university, found my own way in life. And a lot of the times, if you then make the leap and make the move, it comes with quite a few concessions, including your
Yes.
professional career. And that
Yes.
was also quite a big worry of mine. It was a really big worry of mine. So what I did is we got engaged, and about 6 months to my wedding date, I began really applying for jobs within my space, but here,
Mm.
based here in Uganda. So I'd
Mm.
apply and I'd apply and I'd apply on a daily basis. I would have really applied for jobs because I was praying something came through. Um, as luck would have it, had our wedding in June in Kampala. And I got the job I currently hold, which is within the communication space and a non-profit, which is focuses on financial services and financial
Mm.
inclusion in September, which
Wow.
I'm truly, truly, truly grateful to God for.
Mm.
And that's how I ended up settling in Kampala.
Interesting. So you never ever dreamt of leaving the comfort zone of Nairobi to go anywhere else. So before your wedding, had you even traveled a bit to, other parts of Africa or even outside Africa? Had you?
Yes, I had. So, and I think the other thing is I'm fortunate enough that the jobs that I held give me the opportunity to either execute in other countries or travel to these other countries for meetings and
Mm-hmm.
projects within Africa. Of course, our darling East Africa, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania I traveled to. In Southern Africa, South Africa, and Zambia, West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana. I traveled to Peru in South America.
Mm.
I traveled to Canada, the US, England, Sweden, Denmark, um, UAE, India. India was a personal tour, one of my best
Uh-huh.
tours to date. I think I'm really a cultural tourist, and it blew my mind. So I had traveled quite a bit. I'm sure there are a couple of places which don't come off the top of my head, but I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to get that exposure early on
Mm.
in my career.
Okay. Right. Awesome. Awesome. So how long have you been, living and working in Uganda?
So slightly over 2 years. So
Mm.
take 2 years, 2 months now,
Mm-hmm.
living and working in Uganda
Okay.
and married
So
in Uganda.
yes, yes, yes. So when you told your family and friends, okay, guys, I've met this guy, I think we are serious, and that would mean that I have to cross borders, what were their reactions?
Interestingly, a lot of the women who were close to me,
Mm,
family especially, were more concerned about what happens to your career. These are
yes,
conversations I don't think would happen at all, just even a decade prior to this. But
yes.
even my grandmother was very happy for me. She'd met my fiance. She was completely taken by him. But her biggest concern for me was what happens to your career, what
Career.
happens to your professional life.
Mm,
And she really wanted me to take pause and figure out how to make the transition in a way that would not really affect my career growth.
mm,
So there was a lot of concern when it came to that. And then the other interesting thing I picked up is, and I really believe that as East Africans, we need to cultivate a positive curiosity about each other.
mm-hmm.
Um, yes, there are some countries that are more, economically advanced than others. We are definitely not at the same, at the same base level.
Yes.
Even there are other African countries which are more advanced than, where I'm from. But you need to be curious positively about other countries to try and figure out what are the good parts about that country. Um, so for me, I think one of the most positive things has been the social connections, which are
Mm,
quite strong. The family unit here, well, in as far as I've experienced, is very, very strong. So those were some of the reactions, interestingly, from a lot of the women around me. And that also tells you about how, I'm strong and how independent a lot of those women are, and that want me to be
yes.
the same. So my I think I'm also grateful that I got a very understanding partner. And in as far as we were married, he didn't, give me an ultimatum of I'm giving you a month or 2 months to make the permanent move. It was more about what works for us as a unit, but also what works for us as individuals because we are all
Yes.
pursuing our own interests. So I didn't really feel the pressure from him to move immediately after the wedding. But I'm sure
Mm,
he also knew that I was doing a lot to try and move in a way that would make sense for me.
yes. You know, what you talk about women supporting women, that's very important, especially now more than ever. Because most times when you tell people, say you're moving, in this case, you're getting married, you're moving to another country, the concerns are more about the marriage itself and not the individual who is you in this case. It's like, but how are you going to do this when you're married? How is this going to happen when you're married? Hey, when you're married, but what about me, the individual? You guys are not asking about what
This
am
is
I
true.
comfortable?
This is true.
Is
Yes,
this will this really work for me? So I'm glad that you had a support system that was looking out for your individual interests in this union, and I think we should have more of
definitely,
that moving forward. And I guess you're
definitely,
one of the lucky
definitely.
ones. You're one of the
I don't,
lucky
I mean, it
ones.
was a mixed bag. It was a mixed bag. There were some people who are more, focused on, you know, the marriage aspect and element of it, which is understandable.
Yes.
But I must say the people who stood out for me, led by my grandmother who lives in Busia, and who's raised 10 children herself, was what struck me the most and which has remained with me through that experience of you need to think not just about today, you need to think about the next 5 years, you need to think about the next 10 years, you need to think about the next 50 years of your life. And you need to make your moves in a way that makes sense. So the women who rallied around me in that manner have come to view in a whole new light of respect.
Yes.
And these are people who I'd actually then be able to go and talk to and
Hmm.
ask for advice from when I'm making some of these larger life moves.
That's very important. So apart from that, well, you had traveled around Africa and Uganda. But were there any other fears that you held you as an individual, or maybe perhaps cultural things you were not so sure about, male things you might have heard over the media, or people around you? People talk a lot, and I think some of this talk is what prevents many people from making moves, so to speak. So, what are some of those things that you might have had that got you thinking, staying up in the dead of the night?
Yeah, I mean we have all these perceptions about each other. And I think earlier I'd mentioned
Mm,
the need for a positive curiosity,
curiosity.
especially now that we are organizing ourselves around regional blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Bad news sells and flies the fastest. But
Yes.
there are so many things that are happening in other countries in the East African bloc that are positive stories, from stories of entrepreneurship, stories to women turning around, their life stories for the benefit of the women coming after them in their families.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many positive stories. Now, one of the biggest fears that I had was the space for my profession, and would there be as many opportunities for me in Kampala as there were in Nairobi? Because I was in communication. Quite a lot of organizations are based or have their anchor for the rest of the region in Nairobi.
Yes.
um, I worked in development. Again, a lot of organizations anchored in
Mm-hmm.
Nairobi. And
Yes.
one of my biggest fears would be the amount of opportunities that would be available to me. But the organization that I currently work with, which is in financial inclusion and financial services development, has been one of the most dynamic working experiences of my life. It's in a very niche field, um, very, very, very fast paced,
Specific. Mm.
working a lot, at the policy, regulatory level, market infrastructure level, financial services level. So very fast paced. It's been such a brilliant team that I've worked with. Um, so I think that kind of very early on, after I joined the organization, that fear of mine was allayed.
Mm,
So the space for my career was one big fear I had. Of course, the cultural fits. There are a lot
yes.
of urban legends about, Kenyans being very aggressive and forceful, and Ugandans being a lot more laid back and, steeped in culture and respectful. And I was just wondering, will I really fit in and can I be my genuine 100% self when I move here? But I mean, I've met so many outspoken, dynamic firecracker women who are blazing the trail here in Kampala. And I'm like, you know what? We really need to take time to learn more about each other in that
Each
space.
other.
So I
Yes.
think those two things were some of my biggest concerns. And then, of course, you've lived in a city your whole life. I've lived in Nairobi my whole life. Um, my social connections were primarily
And
based
then
there. My
mm,
professional connections were primarily based there. How would I integrate and just move? You know, moving doesn't necessarily have to do with your job only.
yes.
Moving can be something as simple as where can I take my child to the clinic? Where can I get a recreational spot where me and my family can go for the weekend? Because my husband had lived outside of the country as well for a bit of time. He'd moved back to Uganda well before I moved here, but there
Mm,
was also there was that how do we reconnect and really dig our roots in here?
uh-huh.
So those were some of my earliest fears and concerns. But then you're planning a move, you're planning a wedding, you don't really get a lot of time to
To think.
think about them and work through them. So I think I just took I
Close
dove
your
into it.
eyes and
Yes,
dove
and
into it.
trusted and trusted. Yes.
I see. All right. So, about moving and working, how easy or difficult was it for to process working visas and all these things? Once again, those are things that I still don't understand why, as East Africans, we still have these stringent things around us. Yet, unemployment is real. That's not something we cannot run away from. It is real, and perhaps if there are Kenyans coming to work in Uganda and Ugandans going to work in Tanzania, yet the employment situation is not very favorable, perhaps the government are trying to protect their own. I understand that, but in this world, in this new era where we're in, I feel like every country has something special about it that another country might need. So making that movement easier perhaps would increase the economic pie and would have more jobs for everyone. But we're still holding on to our restrictions.
Yeah.
But anyway, how easy or difficult was it? And did you even know about these things? Because some people move
Yeah. It.
and then
Yeah.
they're like, hey, you mean I need I need a working visa, I need a working permit, you know?
Oh, it's I really like what you've said, and I think right now, especially with the direction the world is heading in, we
Mm,
are moving to a new economy that's knowledge based, information based. Our most precious resource in East Africa, or one of the most precious resources we have, is the people, the young
yes.
people, the brilliant people who have been exposed more than ever than the generations before them. So governments and authorities can either look at this as a threat and take that protectionist stance of let's protect what's ours, or an opportunity to cultivate things like a larger market.
Yes.
And um, I, I mean, I moved from an East African country to another East African country. I had proven work experience for over 10 years in my field. I was getting married to a Ugandan and settling here, but I still had to go through the rigors of applying for a permit. So that in itself was quite a process. Huh? And the thing that's, I think one of the most practical tips is, we are moving to online portals and everything is
Mm-hmm.
going online these days. And even here in Uganda, you apply for your work permit online. But what
Mm-hmm.
I'd really encourage people who are moving as a first timer, if at all possible, go to the relevant government office, get clear direction on what you need to do, and then lodge your applications. Because sometimes it can be something very, very simple that causes you a lot of problems down the line. So
Mm-hmm.
get that clear guidance. So before my work permit was processed, I had to subsist on short-term, the visas, and
Um,
it's very random. When you're coming in, sometimes the immigration official will give you 1 month stamp in your passport, sometimes 2 months, sometimes 3 months. If you're extremely lucky at the border, I guess you can get, a couple of more months. So everything is tied to your status in the country.
uh-huh.
Now, because I was waiting for my work permit to be processed, I did not want to apply for a dependence pass, which would mean I did not have the rights to work here. So
Mm,
when I handed in when I got my passport stamped with the visa open for X number of months, when you go to MTN to get your line, your mobile line, they only open it for the duration of which your visa has been stamped. So if you have a
yes.
2 month visa, your line will only be open for 2 months. You go to the bank and they're like, we can't open an account
Oh,
for you
yeah.
unless you have either a dependence pass or a work permit. And so it required quite a lot of flexibility and creativity on my end.
Mm,
So I still have quite a few ties back home. So I still operate my account back home. Thank God for
yes.
online banking. I'd get a number from my husband to use in the interim, but otherwise I'd have to keep going to open up my line at the telecom.
Mm,
So on a very practical level, some of the things I remember was the actual drive, the actual move, driving from Nairobi to Kampala because we decided to do the drive.
driving.
Um,
Wow.
yes, driving. So it was quite an adventure, largely an uneventful trip, but you might want to consider if, because we had a van and we had a substantial amount of, my personal goods
Items. Mm,
with us as we were crossing. And they're personal goods, they're, zero commercial value, but depending on the amount of stuff you're moving with, you might get into, all sorts of issues at the border. So
mm,
make sure you have all your documentation right. You have, a pro forma invoice listing all your
wow.
things, demonstrating the commercial value of those things, unless you're just traveling with very few things, which you won't have a problem with. And then also service provision. You need to be very careful of the courier service that you use.
Mm-hmm.
There are very many creative ways of moving your stuff across. If it's just one border, you can either use a bus,
Mm,
you can use truckers who cross the border.
yes.
You can use a form of courier service. Now, sometimes we feel that you'll pay a premium to get premium service, but that's
Yes.
not necessarily always the case. So if you do have a substantial amount of things to move, perhaps maybe, and I didn't do it, but this is something people can explore, is talking to the professional moving companies, the people who move
Mm,
houses and can move you across, as opposed to a courier company. That might work out better.
okay.
Yes. Then, at least in terms of a place, my husband already had a place. So at least I got up, I came to a house that was already, he had
Furnished.
stuff in the house. So I was starting from, ground zero.
Scratch.
Um, but it was about now exploring the surroundings. One thing I love about Kampala is fresh fruit, vegetables, like they're so sizable. The food here is amazing. It's an abundant country, and that's one of the things they have going for them.
Mm,
So, I mean, we have an orange tree at the gate of our home where we stay. There's an avocado tree that's currently overladen, just across our fence. It's a really abundant country food wise. So it was about exploring the markets, learning how different things that I use a lot are called in Luganda, figuring
Mm.
out who, now I have a specific stall I usually go to in the market to get my stuff. There's a lot, I love the markets here, the fresh food, the different vegetables, the different ways of cooking. It's just amazing. So it's just about discovering your locale